everyone. Thank you for having me today. Really appreciate it. As mentioned, I'm fortunate to be a co-author of a white paper in conjunction with the IAAE, as well as Dan Hill, also from Thermo Fisher. Just want to introduce IAAE first. IAAE is a not-for-profit education credentialing organization, fantastic organization, and really focused on helping build the workforce capability in life sciences around digital manufacturing. We've worked with them for many years in various capacities. I'm fortunate to be part of the Life Sciences Advisory Board for IAAE, and really feel strongly and proud of that organization's mission and vision. So first, I'd be remiss not to mention McKay Gloyd here from IAAE. Please reach out to her. She's right over there during the day if you want to learn more about the organization. I think that they do fantastic work. As mentioned, if you want, you can download an early version or access to our current white paper through that QR code. Please, again, happy to chat about it with anyone else. So, the white paper, what was our kind of vision for this and kind of audience? So, we're trying to help provide some guidance for both the business leaders and decision makers, as well as those of us that are the digital transformation leaders in this space. We're looking to help on both sides of that, help define business value for our leaders and help educate them in terms of digital solutions and technology and how it can actually help and improve the business, right? And help how to gain that alignment. How do we overcome some of the challenges that are going to be common that we all see in some examples as well as some guidances that we provide? And then kind of just high level, kind of some steps in terms of how do you develop that digital strategy and roadmap. So that was kind of the overall scope. I'll present kind of a summary of this white paper today, but again, more than happy to discuss this with anyone after. So I want to pose these couple of questions to the audience and maybe think about it during the presentation, and we'll come back to it at the end. But I'm curious to see what everyone's thoughts are in terms of, do you feel like you're getting the value that you would expect from digital initiatives in your organization or your function or wherever you are? And then what do you think are the biggest barriers that you're facing as it relates to digital and being successful with your digital initiatives? So I'm putting out those two questions. Think about it. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are, if it aligns with some of our thoughts as well. And if it does, I'd like to hear your input at the end of the presentation. So digital transformation industry. What are some of the drivers and why are we all doing this? I think hopefully this is a summary for everyone, but obviously we know that there's a need and demand for increasing efficiency from an operational level, process development, et cetera. We also face more challenges, more complex processes, diverse product mix, et cetera. So it is critical for us to be efficient, and digital is absolutely a key lever for us to be able to achieve that. We're also all under pressure in terms of accelerating our delivery timelines, whether in development and manufacturing, but we have to meet the commitments that we have to our patients and clients. And then lastly, not just producing the material, but producing it with quality and reliability. So I think we all are in general alignment that these are some of the key drivers for digital initiatives. But then in terms of kind of where the trends are, I think we've already said that, and I agree with, that technology now has evolved significantly over the last 10, 20, 30 years. Technology is no longer the limiting factor. Technology exists, so it's matured significantly, and it's still evolving very fast, right, as we know with all the different AI solutions out there, right? So it's challenging to keep up, but the technology exists now where maybe 20, 30 years ago it did not. There's that need, and I think COVID highlighted this, right, in terms of needing to make sure our processes are resilient, our supply chains are resilient, and we can maximize, and optimize things like our inventories and lead times and things like that. And then from a people perspective, we know now, especially in the digital and analytics space, we're competing and trying to attract talent with many other industries, right? So it's not just in life sciences, it's with tech, many other industries. So there's a limited pool of people that we can bring into the organizations, and how do we deal with those kind of challenges? So, what are some of the common challenges that we're seeing as digital leaders in our organizations, and I think hopefully a lot of these will resonate with many of you, but we've talked about it a little bit already, like, that pilot purgatory. I think organizations are good about being willing to spend a little bit of money for a pilot to show some success, but how do we move beyond that, right? That's always, I think, the question. We can do a lot of little pilots, but how do we scale that? How do we move on from that, that mindset even? As well as, how do we adapt and bring in technologies? And I would argue it's not necessarily just about the technologies themselves, it's how do we organizationally and people-wise adapt to the technologies and the changes that they bring that we're trying to achieve. As well as kind of breaking those silos across functions, areas of your supply chain, et cetera. And I think, to me, one of the biggest challenges that I face, at least, is how do we get that organizational and leadership commitment and sponsorship for these initiatives, right? And I think that's tied into these other questions as well. And how do we tackle that? So these are kind of some of the high-level examples of some of the challenges that we're seeing, for those of us in the digital space. So, in the white paper and in this presentation, we're trying to highlight, I'd say, 2 key points. How do we manage and deal with the lack of clarity and often lack of vision or roadmap in terms of digital transformation? We may have differing roadmaps that are not aligned across our organizations. Our leaders may have certain preconceived notions around what digital means that may be not aligned to ourselves. So how do we deal with that lack of clarity? And then 2, how do we convince our leadership and our organization to absorb the cost and effort associated with these kind of initiatives? And how do we speak the same language in terms of value proposition? So we'll talk through this and give some examples and guidances throughout the presentation. So I think the first question that we all need to be able to understand, and I think this is critical, is what does digital mean for your organization? And what are the drivers for digital? So we'll walk through kind of some high-level paths to buy-in, but focusing on first, what does it mean for your organization? What is the driver for digital for you and where you are? And I think the first step to address that is you need to educate and align with your stakeholders. Again, digital, the term, and I'm intentionally using it very loosely. We've talked about other ways of defining it, but I think critical is just aligning with your leadership and what do they think it means, what do they think it's going to help you with, and then understand where those gaps are. Ways you could help, let's say, educate our leaders is you could use examples like this digital maturity pyramid. I'm sure you've seen similar maturity models around analytics and digital, but this can help them understand a little bit of that progressive nature of the work that we're trying to accomplish. This is kind of from an analytics perspective, but the key thing here, I would say, is really starting at the base, is making sure that you have that access to the data. So starting to break down those silos, and maybe you have limited systems here and there, but you have no easy way of getting at it. And so the first step typically is to make it democratized, fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, right? So that's where there is going to be some investment, obviously, in terms of potentially infrastructure and systems to connect your data sources. But that's your first step, right? Because I've heard a few times now, people want to jump to AI, and we're dealing with data on paper, right? So that's not going to get you very far. So I think there's that education element of you need to make that data accessible. As you do that, that's where you can start to gain value. You can start to provide that data to provide more insight for the employees. They can make better decisions. They can connect it to their work. You can automate workflows in simple ways. Again, starting to show the value of it, but there is that initial hurdle, and then as you have now access to the data, you can do more with it. And then the natural progression becomes not just when needed, it's real-time access to your data, so you could do real-time process modeling, you could do very real-time analytics, and that brings even the data closer to where the work is happening. I think that can be very beneficial. And then kind of lastly, and again, it doesn't mean that we all have to achieve at the peak here, but you can get to more of that predictive or prescriptive state using AI and other technologies. But that's a journey, right? So I think the key point here is this is a journey that you have to take, and you're not going to jump to the peak in one step. And then the other key thing too is as you move across this, it's not just the technology or the business processes, it's the people in your workforce, right? So you need to bring the people with you on that journey. And in terms of their skill sets, their fluency of digital, what does it mean for them? So that's a process on its own, and you have to bring that together. So in terms of communicating that this journey and the maturity model to our leaders, I think the other aspect is highlighting, you may not want to get to the end always, or that may not be your final destination, but as you move up that pyramid, the organizational and business value increases, right? You can do more and leverage more of your data. As you become more mature, you become technically more proficient, you understand how to use this data. That's, I think, the value. And so often we're always tasked with, okay, what can I get as an ROI, from this pilot? And there is something, we need to be able to quantify that, but we also need to communicate that there is further horizons that we can look towards that can continue to provide value. Obviously, from an investment perspective, there is definitely an initial investment, significant in some cases, but I think some of it, reduces as you build out your infrastructure. So it becomes more of an investment in people, in ideas, understanding how you leverage the technology as part of your business. So, in terms of communicating to our leaders, I think taking them through this step and this journey is absolutely essential. And then, showing them that you can look at this across your value chain, right? So it's not just operations or development that is doing this, but we need to think about this collectively and, potentially think about how do we collaborate and work together, right? So we tend to work in silos and think about our own areas, but especially as it relates to digital, there's a lot of advantages to think about it. Do we go together versus going alone? And we'll touch on that a little bit more. But I think this is something else we need to understand as organizations that work across the value chain for our patients. So one other concept, and again, people may have different terminology, and we had to align what it meant for us, but I think that's important for our leaders, is making the distinction between what we would call digital evolution and digital transformation. So this is, I think, part of that defining your vision for digital. What is it? How are you going to achieve this, right? And it can be a process. It's not that you have to necessarily pick one and stick with it forever, but you can transition as it makes sense for your organization. But it comes down to, in some ways, are you taking a very tactical approach, or are you looking at it more holistically in terms of your transformation of your business? So the way we defined the two, we looked at evolution as more stepwise and, generally speaking, shorter term in terms of your digital initiatives. Typically, you'd be evolving your existing processes. Maybe you're adding layers of analytics to help provide additional insights. And you're trying to address maybe specific needs. Maybe you have a business need that we need to increase yield by 5%. We need to reduce our changeover times in operations, things like that, right? And typically it's going to be domain or functionally focused. So in manufacturing or supply chain or whatever the case may be. Transformation, the way we defined it, was longer term. You're looking at longer horizons. It's going to be introducing new ways of working and transforming how you operate in some cases versus pre-digital. And looking at it more holistically, right? Not just focused on the technology, right? As we've already heard multiple times, and I 100% agree, it's not about the technology necessarily. So holistically looking at people, process, and technology, and how does this come together for your business? And then I think, as important, it's that educational and cultural component of digital, right? So people have to be able to be ready to, let's say, receive or absorb these changes, right? And this is, I don't think I'm saying anything unheard of, but there is a natural resistance I think all of us have as humans to, deal with change, and we need to figure out how to align to that. But I think that's a critical component as you try to take that digital transformation journey. One example, and I thought it was interesting, and I think it highlighted, in reality, kind of the organizations that are, let's say, leading in this space. This was a HBR study, and they analyzed different companies from different industries in terms of, their digital mastery. And I thought it was very interesting that the companies that they categorized as at the highest quadrant in terms of digital and capabilities had these common themes. So overarching digital vision, excellent governance across sites. They were seeing value from the initiatives, right? So it wasn't just for show, let's say, and they had a strong digital culture. But none of that actually speaks to that they had the best technology or they used the most cutting edge AI or whatever the case may be. So all those things were about the process they followed, the culture, the education, the leadership factors as well. So I want to highlight that because I thought that was very telling, that it's not necessarily about the technology itself, it's about how you approach this holistically. So how do we start communicating and capturing the value proposition for this type of work? And I think the first step is just understanding what are we trying to achieve, right? And you need that business understanding. You need to collaborate with the business and process owners, but you're trying to improve the business, solve business problems. So it's setting that clear expectation with them, aligning of what you actually really want to accomplish. We're not looking to put technology for the sake of technology, because if you do that, it's not going to be sustained, and we all know this. So some examples and let's say considerations of value drivers, and we tried to look at it both in maybe the traditional sense as well as maybe some intangible. So obviously from a traditional sense, a lot of our leaders care about the hard costs, the things that affect P&L, COGS, productivity, expenses, et cetera. You can look at it also kind of from a functional area. So in operations, you may look at how do we improve yield, throughput, equipment effectiveness, changeover times, things like that. In quality, so I'm in the quality organization right now, and one thing that we've done, for example, is try to tie in quality performance to our financials. And again, we didn't invent this, but we developed a cost support quality model that incorporates the time to resolve deviations as well as material that's scrapped. So we can at least translate that into dollars and use that as justification for improvement initiatives. You can look at right first time, cycle times, et cetera, as well. And then same with supply chain. You can look at lead times and things of that nature, inventory on hand, and if applicable. The other part, I think, is part of the communication, the considerations with our leaders, is some of the intangible aspects of digital and these kind of initiatives. So I think speaking to like the talent attraction side of things, I think there's a organizational reputation part that could be promoted, as well as talent attraction. So I think people, generally speaking, in this space want to go to organizations that look like they're leading and working hard and trying to move forward our industry in this space, versus ones that maybe are on paper entirely, right? Internally, I think as employees actually see the value, there's going to be that level of satisfaction, and you start to build that culture, right? So I think you're showing that you care about the people and the organization, and you're trying to make improvements at the end of the day. And then, practically speaking, right, if you can take something that people have to do every day, takes 2 hours to copy data from this system to that system to Excel to whatever, and you can automate that shows value for them. Even if it's something as simplistic as that, I think people appreciate that, and you start to build that trust and confidence and credibility as well. And then kind of future looking, right? You're in terms of enabling future value, you're setting yourself up for success, as we talked about with the digital pyramid. So, as an example, right, when we talked about like this value chain figure and kind of going it alone and going together, you can also look at value across the value chain, right? So instead of just focusing on your area, there's opportunities to gain value that maybe not as obvious, or you can grow even further. So a simplistic example, let's say in development and manufacturing, they have their systems, they have data, but maybe they don't have a way to access it. So instead of each building their own, whatever you want to call it, data warehouse, data lakes, whatever, and just creating silos that are taller, if they work collaboratively across those organizations, even though they have different systems, different needs for that data, they can feed that data into a common platform. So that reduces the cost, effort, and support needs for those solutions, yet both parts of the organization can benefit from it. So just a thought in terms of how we need to look at it holistically and not just in our own silos. So some barriers to transformation. I'll go quickly through some of these, but the IAAE did a research paper with MXD and polled industry experts in terms of understanding some of the barriers to change. across people, technology, regulatory, et cetera. So just a few examples from that research they found, from a business barrier, there's that concern. I think it's valid in terms of disruption to business continuity, or when you're trying to replace or change legacy systems, or in cases move from paper to digital, right? So we know there's a effort and disruption involved there from a business perspective. From a technology barrier, it's about kind of almost the resources to support the technology, and there's constraints there. There's maybe lagging skill sets, gaps in communication, again, in terms of alignment between strategies with development and manufacturing, as well as many of us know, often when you have companies that have grown through acquisition, you're going to have disparate systems across sites. And then in terms of people, the things we talked about, limited availability of resources, and limited opportunities for people to actually upskill themselves that's promoted through the organization. So these were some of the common barriers that were identified. So we've come up with some suggestions and potential approaches. How do you address these barriers? So in terms of business, right, you could consider, instead of like a more siloed approach, you develop things like center of excellence. So you develop a more standardized approach, so you get benefit of having, leveraging the resources that you do have. You develop a more standardized solution so that there's less of those, let's say, you spread the digital maturity more evenly instead of having sites and parts of the organization that are much more mature and some that are less. You develop that culture of innovation through learning and educating folks. And again, as we talked about, educating your leadership team. And then it's communicating, right? Sharing those lessons learned. So those in different parts of the business can learn from each other and improve faster and quicker and take the best solutions that exist across your network. From a technology, again, I don't think anything unheard of, but developing more standard platforms and interfaces. So again, not having 10 different ERP systems, for example, would go a long way. Having that common roadmap, right? So I think I've seen many times IT will have their digital roadmap, tech ops will have their roadmap, quality will have their own digital roadmap, and we do our best to talk, but they're not aligned. And so how do we overcome that, right? So working more cross-functionally and developing that common roadmap would go a long way. And then kind of from like a regulatory perspective, we talked, it was mentioned earlier about not digitizing an inefficient process. So there's that risk in some cases or the idea of adding digital because there's reluctance to change a process due to validation and things like that, but trying to avoid that pitfall. Also, taking other approaches, things like value stream mapping, to help find improvements in your process, find waste in your process before you digitize it. And then again, promoting that culture and applying things like change management, change leadership, in addition to just operational excellence, can go a long way. In terms of the people barriers, like we've talked about, education, training, both internally as well as developing that encouragement of people seeking additional training. Another idea was, developing cross-functional delivery teams, right? So instead of IT having the technical resources and then tech ops having some data engineers and another group of business analysts, bring them, even if it's virtually, let's say, to work on these solutions and these initiatives together, and that might be a more effective and efficient approach. And then, again, thinking about things beyond just, let's say, the traditional operational excellence, but thinking about it from an organizational and change management behaviors, as well as human performance. So I know we're close to time, so I want to tell just one last, more of like an anecdote, and Gloria will vouch for me in terms of this story and kind of just the journey that we've gone through in a past company. So it's, in terms of like addressing all these different kind of paths to digital, at a previous company we joined and we had virtually little technology. We took that journey, we started working with our leaders, we got the buy-in, we implemented solutions that moved us away from Excel and things like that. We were able to automate and show value for the organization in terms of reducing the time to do certain analytics, annual product reviews, et cetera, from days to weeks, weeks to days. we built credibility across the organization. We worked with other functions like materials management, quality, QC, in different areas. We integrated other systems over time. We eventually even added things like real-time access to data, so building out data historians, which led us to be able to do real-time multivariate monitoring, and looking at our processes in real time and monitoring the performance before, for example, there was a deviation or a batch that had to be discarded. And it was an educational journey as well. We worked actually with IAAE. We trained the team that I was on, from folks that were doing data entry to data scientists, but tailored to their capabilities and needs. And I think it opened our eyes of what was possible, and I think that helped us continue that digital journey. So I just wanted to share that as like an anecdote really briefly. But that's how, in a past life, we took that journey. So again, just to summarize, it's definitely a journey. As you climb that mountain, it's going to hurt at first. Your muscles are going to be sore. You're going to get a little better at it over time. You're going to get to that peak, that summit. The next time you need to see that next challenge, it's going to get easier. But it's important to understand why you're doing this, what you're trying to accomplish, that your leaders are with you, aligned, and you're addressing those barriers proactively as well. So just want to acknowledge really quick, again, IAAE, Dan Hill, co-author of the paper, Daniel Caraher, and Andrew Bird, that were also reviewers and editors as well. And I know we're at time, so flashing back the questions from the beginning, if we have time for Q&A, that'd be great. Otherwise, just want to prompt folks again in terms of some of the things to think about, and be curious to hear feedback, even if it's offline. Okay. So maybe first, I would be curious, any thoughts in reaction to these questions? Has anyone, any other feedback in terms of, do you feel like you're getting value from the digital initiatives? If not, I'd be curious why. What are those barriers that you guys are encountering? Any feedback there?
Thank you. Hi. Thanks for the presentation.
Sure.
So I work in the trenches, is what I call it. So I'm sort of like from the ground up. And so when I think of barriers, I have a lot of your principles in my presentation as well. I think we're all sharing a lot of these ideas. But when the rubber hits the road and you're dealing with large amounts of people and large amounts of data and different processes, I'm still very much seeing what I'll say on the ground floor, tremendous deficiencies when it comes to understanding exactly how to use solutions. And I'm talking just day to day. So we're talking to leadership, but my experience is they're really far away from that.
Yep.
And the pressures on leaders are completely different than the pressures on people on the floor. And then if you go to the floor and you say, hey, this is the vision, my experience is that's not going to translate very well. So when I think about what are the barriers, for me, at the root of it, at the heart of it, it's still how do we address the different tiers operationally towards this type of vision, when what I'm seeing is there's just these huge gaps, even just culturally.
Right. That's a fantastic point, and I think a lot of us, I'm sure, can echo that. And we used to joke sometimes when trying to convey these type of, let's say, solutions and technologies to certain folks, is you may as well be talking about time travel. Like it was irrelevant because they can't connect yet. How does it help them in their day-to-day work, right? So that's a great comment.
So actually, I wanted to ask, relative to that point, in one of the slides you had, you have in the slide tactical separated from strategy. And I was curious why tactical isn't a box within strategy, because right. I think that starts to, if you think of it that way, it starts to help, where leadership says, look, this is our vision, this is our strategy, this is what we're trying to accomplish as an organization over the next few years, but tactical is the pieces that get us there, right? And that's how you can communicate to the people in the trenches, okay, you're dealing with paper, it takes you however many hours to do X, Y, and Z. We start with this to deal with that as from a tactical perspective, because it fits into the overall strategy.
Right. No, I think you're 100% right in terms of tactical is part of the holistic. I think sometimes we start in the tactical and we can't figure out how to get beyond that. And that was kind of what we're trying to show, that how do you move beyond just that tactical pilot mode implementation into more of that holistic view of things. But yeah, absolutely, you need to do the work. You need to understand the business needs as part of that overall strategy.
Great. Thank you, Rob.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.